Cool. This is Matt Sonics again. This is my last final speech, my civic issues speech, where I build off the state your position speech. In this one I'll present some counter arguments as well, but defend my position even further. Is my audience today? Let me say that. Yeah, crossing the dove and the hawk gives you turkey. Yeah, I think ultimately when you start getting into finding belligerent or military ways to combat or instill peace, I think you get into sort of nonsense arguments. Ultimately what that means. Virtually everyone desires peace. Overwhelmingly, most people don't want to kill each other, right? I mean, the ones who people overtly want to kill each other are either sociopathic or psychopathic. So at our most core, we don't want to kill each other. Regardless, some see military violence as an acceptable instrument for peace. On the other side of that, Gandhi said there is no way to peace. Peace is the way itself. Violence begets violence. Others might say you have to fight fire with fire. In the end, the issue is so complex it can't be resolved with bumper sticker solutions to it, right? That being said, in 7 minutes I want to explain to you why pacifism, it's an easier case, that it's morally pure and consistent than fighting. But it's also economically more pragmatic, than belligerent diplomacy. Here is my resources, my list of resources. You can look when I post it online and go further. And they draw from religious thinkers, philosophers. I looked a lot at the Army War College. Of course, they deal with this issue a lot. OpposingViewpoints.com, which has thousands of articles on the subject. I had a telephone interview with my ethics professor, Professor Coyles. And a lot of conversations with my twin brother, Professor Sonicson, who's a professor of political science here where I live, and also gave me lots of insights, especially into the pragmatic elements of pacifism. In class, the class that I'm in, we did a survey on war and peace, and what we see is 1/6 of the class was overtly pacifist, like categorically pacifist. War is just wrong on all accounts. 1/6 as well were sort of pro-war, like more generous views and liberal views towards war. Another 6 saw that war could be used as an offensive form of peacekeeping. Half of the class said that war was a useful instrument of defense and humanitarian aid. But so what do we really see? I mean, really only 1/6 of the class is pro-war. The majority of us have conservative views towards violence in the sense that we don't really want it, right? The other result that I saw in the survey is that people are categorically opposed to plunder, torture, and rape as instruments of war, Who wouldn't be, besides people who are sociopaths and psychopaths. And yet, if we as people are ultimately against these things, we must accept that they are inevitable results of war, Anytime you fight a war in national or political interests, things that are going to happen there is people, it's going to result in people plundering, people are going to be tortured, innocent lives are going to be lost, and women are going to be raped. The Economist did an article on this called the silent victims of war, and it is an inevitable side effect of war that countless people are raped. And so, if we're all against these things, if we're all opposed against killing, why do we continue to think that war is an effective instrument for any form of diplomacy? Moving on to killing, then, who wants to kill? Most people don't. Several studies, especially conducted by the American military, one specific one, the Colonel Marshall study after World War II, basically came to the conclusion that most soldiers don't like to shoot people. Only 50% of the people killed people directly. What does that mean? Only 50% of soldiers, either flying planes or on the battlefield, fired their guns. And they did this, various studies come to these sorts of results, whether they're looking at the ballistics, like how many bullets get fired, how many people are involved. Really, most people don't want to shoot each other. The results change when the methods of war change, when you can't see your opponent and that sort of thing. But ultimately, in the end of the day, people don't want to shoot each other. So why do we keep acting in ways that end up in us having to plunder, torture, and end up killing each other, if most people don't want to do it? So morally, we know that war is not the way to go. We can't argue about that. But can we look at it from a pragmatic view? Some people denounce pacifism as a privileged view of convenience, right? If you've never been in war, of course you would be against war. If you don't have to fight, why would you want to fight? And yet there are people like Martin Luther King, Mandela, Gandhi, who led civil rights movements that were pacifist in nature, They came from the underclass, certainly not the privileged view, and yet they saw peace, a peaceful resistance as a way of achieving their aims. You know, where violence may have been easier in the short run, they saw peace as a realistic way to do it. So I wouldn't say that's privileged convenience, yeah? The other side of that, I would say, when people start talking about using lives as collateral damages or sacrifices to greater goods, you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, that is an ultimate view of convenience. The people who make those kinds of decisions are the furthest away from any sorts of killing, are never involved directly in the killing. That, to me, is the view of convenience. And I think we really need to consider this. The more people start fighting wars where one side has unmanned combat, where they're sort of steering planes from far away, these drones. Economically, okay, let's get into the economics. Idealistically, what if we directed 2/3 of our military spending into other things? One could be for defense, but if we directed it into things like education, healthcare, access to food and water, we could certainly create more jobs, but don't we start eliminating the causes for conflict? Aren't ultimately all sorts of conflicts come back to those sorts of things? Do we have enough to eat? Are we learning enough? Do we have access to food and water? To me, that's ultimately much more pragmatic. Yeah, I can't think of a more pragmatic aspect than that. What about money? Peace pays for more people. Yeah? The proof of that is, of course, Europe. After World War II, you don't have an area as big, with as many people, who have as much access to good health care, education, where the discrepancy between rich and poor is so small, for so long, as in Europe after World War II. And ultimately, this is the longest period of peace within Europe. War pays for very few people. Yeah, it caused an economic boom, maybe jobs for the military and industrial businesses. But what pays more for more people for longer amounts of time is times of peace. Yeah, and Europe is certainly a case for that. Whenever we get into the sort of the morality, I know there's a lot of gray areas, but when we're talking about killing and rape and torture, we need to get as close to black and white as possible. In the end, that's my civic issue from a global citizen perspective, and I've spoken my piece. Thank you. My honor.